Dr. Meyer, I'd like to ask you to tell me some stories of some of the interesting personalities that you dealt with during your
Maybe
your
I
time
can
here.
I can start with while I was chairman of the board. It was an interesting personality. Would be a man who should be sitting here with us in Kent, and that's Dr. Olson. We reached a crisis in '72. The schools did, and there was a Sunday meeting called by Harry Evans of key leaders in the Free Church. Remember that?
Well, I said it.
And it was held over in the old chapel in the missions building.
You were chairing the board.
I was chairman of the board.
Dr. Consu, you were dean.
Yeah,
at the time.
it was preceded by a Saturday meeting at a hotel, a Travelodge near O'Hare, where the Trinity board. This was all out of this takeover thing, where the Trinity board and the board of directors of the Free Church met without their presidents, without Evans and without Olson. We met on that Saturday for 6 hours. We sat, very interesting. It was a long hall. The Trinity board sat on one side. There was a big space, and then the Free Church board sat on this side, and the chairman of each were facing one another. We met for 6 hours on what are we going to do with the school. Harry had resigned. All of his vice presidents, Ken, had resigned. The school was going down financially, and we were facing the possibility of closing. At the end of this whole long discussion period of 6 hours, the two chairs were appointed to meet with Olson and Evans the next morning for breakfast, Sunday morning, before this meeting. We met at a restaurant near O'Hare, and I had somebody take my service in Rockford and canceled out of preaching. And we met for breakfast. Kelly High from Richville was the chairman of the trustee board, Rice Farmer, and I was chairman. We met with Harry and Arnold, and we sat, Kelly and I sat facing these two Norwegians. And the orders from the combined boards, they passed a resolution that we were to, if Evans was not going to continue as president, then Olson must resign as president. Now get this. So, Kelly says to me, I can't do it. He says, because we met a few minutes early, he says, you're going to have to tell Olson that. I'm at First Free, biggest church in the Free Church at that time, who cares? So I said, this is what has been decided, that since Harry resigned and you and Harry have had these problems that have caused a lack of support in the Free Church for the schools, the two boards have agreed that you must resign, otherwise the two of you have to get along together. I'll tell you, that was a historic meeting. And what happened is those two Norwegians looked at one another, and Arnold said, okay, I'll work together with you. And then we went to the meeting and reported that the two of them had smoked the peace pipe and Harry was withdrawing his resignation, Olson was not forced to resign, and an SOS letter was sent out by the then moderator of the church, Andrew Johnson, Save Our Schools, SOS. And we went through that crisis until it appeared again a year and a half later. But that was just, so you talk about interesting characters. That was an interesting experience.
Two North.
Yeah, and they fought. I would say on interesting characters, Ken and I have probably the same list, but I'm a young guy coming in as president without any educational experience at 42 years of age or something like that, and without a PhD, and like we have Montgomery, Kinnick, in those first years.
The Divinity School.
Culver,
yeah,
Perry.
Culver, Perry, Little. Paul died that next year. We had, but I'm talking about issue people who would fight. Those faculty meetings were something. Kaiser. I mean, Kaiser used to sit in the back of faculty and walk out.
Stamp walking out.
Yeah, if he didn't like what was going on. And, I tell you, when I think of it now, I don't know how we survived, Ken, how you survived with me and my inexperience. And I chaired faculty meetings. I remember
I chaired until you became president.
And I said, look, you can't, as dean, chair the faculty and still speak to the issues that really need to be spoken to. And so I chaired it, and then you could speak to issues, and it worked well for us, I think, the two of us. But we had some real characters to deal with. I think that probably out of the whole group, John Warwick was probably the most difficult to handle.
Did you recruit him to faculty?
Mhm.
Yes.
Last thing I did before I
By phone.
terminated, I approved his fare back from Europe. It was the last thing I
Okay,
did.
so you were here when he was.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Ken had
I
said,
never
"Hey,
met
Ken-
him.
Ken wanted to bring him back. And
I moved it, see, he was chairman, so I could move.
so he could do it, and I said.
couldn't get
said,
a second. I was
No,
a little-
right, I said, Ken, you're not gonna get it. They won't. So he moves it to bring John Warwick back. And nobody seconds it, so it dies. So I said to him, you're calling him tonight. That was the phone conversation, wasn't it? John could let loose with some strong language from time to time. But I think we had, probably the person who controlled the school more in many ways as a young man was David Johnson between 70 and 75, 76.
What was he in the business office?
Yeah, he was
Chief financial
chief
officer.
financial officer.
Heads up Wheaton, yeah.
I know.
And
Very
left
effective.
here in 77.
His father was one of my classmates.
Yeah, graduated in 1938 from Wheaton, I believe. And a wonderful independent Baptist pastor.
And Hakes was at the college as
Oh.
dean. And Ed had come from the seminary in the Christian Ed department. I don't think the people at the seminary knew that lurking in Ed's theological background was something that was really not akin to where we were. And he went over to the college with the purpose to make it the avant-garde evangelical school. And in those next period of years, everything went that way.
He had rebelled against his father, really.
Right.
His father was a thoroughgoing, committed independent Baptist. And he just could not swallow what he conceived of as the narrowness of that independent Baptist group that his father led.
The college had a dean prior to Ed, from Salem Free Church.
Netland.
Ed
Ed
Netland,
Netland.
who probably does not get enough credit.
No, he doesn't.
Is he at all related to Dr. Harold?
No relationship.
No.
But a brilliant person.
Yeah, and he's out in California.
And he's one of those that I determined we needed, because he's from Salem. He was getting his doctorate at Northwestern. The chairman moved to Indiana, and he moved his program to Indiana to finish it. Ed was a very solid guy with a great vision. And you talk about the university. Now, when he stood before the board and told them what he was looking forward to as a vision, this is.
Well, when we became a university, he wrote me a letter congratulating. He said this was part of my dream years ago. He set up really the accreditation for the college, because college was accredited first. We didn't get
It had to be.
Yeah, the
We couldn't
seminary.
get it unless they, or
Right.
we wouldn't take their graduates.
The seminary got its accreditation its first 2 years in 75. And then they came back in 77 when we got our next 10 years. I'll never forget when that I was just in the presidency, less than a year when that first accreditation took place, and I was concerned about being president as a pastor, and they said, hey, that's the direction, it's going. But I took the guy, the chairman, to the airport. He was the president of Southern Seminary down in, and he said, now I just want you to know one thing. He said, just remember this, you've got to keep it financially afloat. 6 months later, they released him because the school went $5 million in deficit in 1 year. the same guy that told me to keep the school.
You saw the bubbles coming up?
But I think there are some interesting board members that we had during that period of time. Donna Peterson was probably the best chairperson that I had in my tenure as a board. She was the only female board chairman I think we have had in the history.
The only one, and she was independent of interchurch politics, which was a great boon.
We had, I think Walt Kaiser was,
Well, Donna was theologically astute,
right,
understood our movement very well, and very
Very
gifted
loyal.
administrator.
and her father was on our board.
Yeah.
He died in '69, I think it
Yeah.
was, and he had been on the board for a number of years. Was instrumental in getting the property out here. But where was I at on? Kaiser. I think Walt Kaiser had a wonderful 10 years. We had a great period of growth. Walt was. I never had a problem with Walt personally. His biggest problem that Walt had was working with some of his faculty, and Ken knows the whole.
And his wife.
Yeah. And really what was the undoing for Walt was the way he treated some of the faculty.
Yeah. He treated them like his little boys.
Yeah. And we had 2 years prior to my releasing him, you remember, I sat down with him, and he went to 12 or 13 faculty at that time to try to straighten things out, but 2 years later, it had grown to about 25 to 30 faculty. And it's like a pastor of a church. If you lose, you may be right, but if you lose the confidence of half of your church,
Then you can't leave.
You can't do
leave.
anything right
And
after that matter.
And before I released him, I consulted with Ken, and he affirmed me what I was going to do. And it was the hardest thing I have ever done, and the only thing that I really regret that I did as president. And just to clear the record, Marge wouldn't talk to us.
She thought you were an inveterate liar. And there was a very straightforward reason for it, but I could never get it through her head. I would talk to her about it. Every time Ken said that he was going to do something, she took that as a valid promise in written in blood, that he was determined and promised to do it. She never distinguished between the Old English difference between shall and will. See? What he meant was, that's what I'm planning to do. But he wasn't saying, no matter what shows up, I'm still going to do that.
And I had said to Walt and to Colonel Wentz,
Marge.
I'd said to him, this is a problem most presidents will have, because you have to affirm what you want to do, but you can't always do it, and you know that.
I am learning quickly.
But let me say,
Helpful.
this last year at the Seminary President's Fellowship, Walt and Marge and Carol and I had lunch together, and we just and everything is back to.
Yeah, I saw that. It
to
looked like you
normal.
were enjoying
Oh,
it. It was wonderful.
Because I really think she felt that I should not have released him. But
I want you to comment on this, though, because when I think of both about Dr. Conser's tenure and Dr. Kaiser's tenure, it seemed to me that one of the great strengths both of them brought to this was the ability to recruit outstanding faculty members.
between Ken and Walt, they built this faculty, and they were both excellent recruiters. We got Bob Coleman a very interesting way. Walt and I were down for a Lilly project, and we were rooming together, and we were talking about missions. And I said, who do you think's the best missions person, evangelism person in the United States? Bob Coleman. I said, well, why don't we call him? Wilmore, Kentucky, you can get phone numbers.
It's like out of the
Yeah.
cornfield.
Yeah. And so we did Saturday night. And here he walked out on the phone, and he said, well, my wife and I have just been talking about should we leave Asbury. And that's how we got Coleman. But both Ken and Walt did a tremendous job of selecting faculty.
Which has become probably the great strength, the faculty and our graduates, the great strength of the divinity school.
The key to it, above everything else, is that you don't, in a desperate time of need, go to a faculty member and say, will you please come? What you do is cultivate them for 5 years before that time, more than one person, so that when you need a person, then you can go to that person with a background of 5 years behind you.
What you call ETS politics.
And then what you ask is, what is it that this guy really wants in his life? And how can we help him do that? And then you try to provide a situation here where he can do something that he himself dreams of doing.
Both faculties, both men, both Walt and Ken, faculty felt they were autocratic on their faculty selection, because they didn't do a lot of consulting with departments sometimes, especially in the initial stages of going after these guys. But my opinion was, that's the job of the dean. Sure.
That's very important. I think.
They certainly they've got to approve who they come in, and you go to them for ideas, but the recruitment is in the hand of the dean at that point.
I've also wondered about your ability to see, I mean, you know about Bob Coleman, he'd already proven himself, but it seems to me that there were some younger men who had not yet proven themselves. That Don Carson. The year that I came, Don Carson, Doug Moo, Dennis McGarry, Grant Osborne, all came in.
Yeah.
Well, I spent 2 years trying to convince Don Carson to be a pre-mill.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
Because he couldn't come.
Yeah.
And when I first contacted him, decided he's the kind of guy we should
He's
get.
up at a little Northwest
Yeah.
Baptist seminary
Right.
in Canada.
In
And who
Vancouver.
Knew Don,
In
who
Vancouver.
knew Don Carson? And I have said Trinity has made more of these guys. I don't say that in the selfish sense, but Trinity gave them a platform, and the sabbatical program allowed them to write. Like, we use the sabbatical program as a tool to recruit people
Sure.
time and time again.
Oh, I should say, we got 3 or 4 faculty members from Wheaton on that basis.
But it takes eyes to see those kind of young people who have potential. Of course,
Well,
they had to be
one-
faithful.
Yeah. One of the things you have to do is that you have to ferret them out and go to ETS meetings, for example, and watch them perform. And if you don't do that, you haven't any way of knowing whether they'll amount to anything or not. And then you have to make a judgment call. How's this?
They need to know you too.
Well, yeah, but you get to know them, and you get to plant in their mind seeds of what we're trying to do and what they could do if they were here. And it all helps.
And there are some interesting donors. I mentioned, I don't know that this was on the tape, the Rockford Church. I don't think we got
I
it.
think we should talk a little bit
Okay.
about Rockford and Trinity.
The Rolfing family brought us, they were contacted through Wilbur Smith.
Right.
And who was teaching here. And Wilbur Smith introduced them to Trinity. They gave $300,000 for a library building, the Rolfing Library. They gave it, and 4 years later, the building, there was a groundbreaking, I remember.
Zero.
Yeah, and nothing was built for 4 years. Finally, they asked for, this was in '74, they asked for their money back. And there was no money to give them back, because Harry's administration had spent the money just paying bills, regular bills. Well, I was pastor at First Free. Harry asked if we would, because we had over $1 million in a bank account sitting there in Rockford, and if we could help. So he came out, we had a congregational meeting, and the congregation voted unanimously to loan to Trinity $500,000. And 3 years later, they wrote off the loan. And at the same time, Clara Handstrom, remember Clara? Medical doctor? She
Pictures in the Rockford room.
Yeah, she gave a $100,000 gift to the library, where we bought at that time all those old collections, on microfiche, which cost about $100,000. She gave in that same '75, '76 period
For the library. They produced all the manuscripts written in English from the very beginning up until roughly after 1900.
And
complete
and
set.
so she gave a gift of that nature. Back years before, Johnson Hall from Rockford, the school in the late 37, 38 was just about bankrupt. He mortgaged his house in Rockford to keep the school afloat
That was 37, 38,
in that period.
yet another
He
time
did
of
it again.
bankruptcy. Yeah.
He did it again a couple of years later.
Which Johnson, so it's on the record.
R.J. J.R. J.R. Johnson.
You should tell us a bit about Olson, not Olson, the fellow whose uncle gave us our present.
Norris?
Yes, Norris Aldine.
Aldine
Yeah,
family.
the Aldine family were strongly tied to Wheaton. Norris was on the board there.
Peter preceded him.
Geter preceded. Geter, his father, was turned off by some of the board members when he was on the board, as you remember, that he felt didn't understand finances and education.
Which they didn't.
And but Norris and his wife gave over a period of 15 years, probably about $2.5 million. We did all of the we did all the road work with one gift. Reuben gave the building back here. Norris gave part of the money for the chapel, and then generally just supported the general budget. So the Aldine family has been very instrumental. It has not been so since his death, but the children are not believers, and they have not much interest that way. But the Rockford Church really, in many ways, has stepped in helping the school out over the history.
Yeah, financially, I just see that Rockford Church has been central to almost every crisis period here. Yeah. Interestingly, the Arlington Heights Church keeps providing
Yeah.
people. I mean,
Yeah, present.
The last three pastors came over here then,
Right, right.
with Harry Evans and
Right.
then Ted Olson into the homiletics department. Then I came here, but they have never had the same kind of financial support that the Rockford Church.
Well, I don't think they're the same kind of people.
Well, you see, that was old money in Rockford.
That's
They
right.
don't have it now.
That was the Rockford Manufacturing Company.
Well,
Of
it
which-
was
What was it called?
hardware,
Supply.
Amrock,
Amrock.
American Rockford Cabinet Company. But there were a number of things. A number of businesses were sold in Rockford in the late 60s, early 70s, where the first three Rockford people became millionaires. When I came there were probably 20 to 30 millionaires in that church, all because of the fact they had stock in these companies that sold.
Before you have to go, I also want to talk with you about places where you've seen God's hand in specific ways. And I know one story that we alluded to earlier, but I want to come back to, has to do with that time when you went out on this preaching tour, had to raise that money in the 2 weeks, and showed up in that little church where you didn't know anybody.
Well, what it was, you know, I got that call in February.
So the time period would be,
This is 1984.
okay.
You became president in January '84.
January 83.
'83. Well, then it was 1983. February '83, because we were a creditor of the. They owed us
The
money.
Divinity School was a creditor.
Yeah, and what we did just prior to that, the 17 acres back here was owned by the college, and we bought it from them. The seminary did for $400 and some thousand, so they could pay bills. All right, remember that came into our hands then. The next time we loaned them $250,000. Well, when I got that call, I spent the next period of weeks, I think it was about 8 weeks, trying to raise this $2.2 million. Half of it were in gifts, and half of it was were in loans. But I understood, in my thinking, if that college got sold and if it went down, it would impact adversely on the seminary. Now, you know, we had faculty, including the dean at that time, who wished we had just let it go.
Including the head of the denomination, or
Yeah.
former head.
But God did something in preserving something, and that was, I spent 3 years as head of the Christian Education Department at headquarters back in the 60s, 67 through 66 through 69 to 69. I made visits to over 300 churches in those 3 years and met with boards, Sunday school boards, so forth. Those were the people that in '84 I went to, that I had met, and Trinity donors, many of them, and asked for either gifts or loans. The first one I called was a farmer in the Holcomb, Nebraska church, just died recently. And I said, I need some money, and I told him why and so forth, and he said, okay, he said, I'll send you $100,000. He said, and no interest, just hold on to it. Well, about 5 years later, he gifted it to the school. But it was a lot of smaller gifts and some larger, loans. The Moline Church loaned us $400,000. We had a number of churches that loaned the school money at that time. Well, I came to the last Sunday before the Tuesday when it was supposed to, it was either or. And I'm down in this little church in Missouri, or Arkansas, can't remember. It's new to the Free Church. Jack Starr, remember Jack Starr?
Yeah.
Okay, he was the pastor there, and it had just come into the Free Church a year before it had been an independent church. I'm preaching for a weekend, and I'm saying to the Lord on the plane down, this is the worst place in the world for me to be with $150,000 short. And I knew this guy at the bank would not take a penny less. And I said, I should be in Rockford, Lord. Well, not to a place I don't know anybody but the pastor, and he hasn't got any money. And so I was doing a weekend of prophecy preaching. And this little church, on Sunday, the pastor said to me, not knowing a thing about what was on my mind, said, you have a burden. Will you just tell us what the burden is? This is Sunday morning, the last service. And I told him, I got to have $150,000 before Tuesday morning in order to save the college. And I walked down from the pulpit after preaching, and our pastor in New Mexico, Albuquerque.
The one now, Gary Hamburg?
Gary Hamburg.
Yeah.
His brother, who since died, met me, and he said, Ken, I'm sending you $50,000 in the morning. Oh, boy. And so I walk out and into the lobby, and a man shakes my hand. I didn't know his name, and I felt something in his hand. Passed from to my hand, and it was paper. So I made a quick visit to the washroom to see what he gave me, because I didn't want to obviously open it up. Here's a check, $50,000. I walked out to the rental car, and it was kind of oil country area, and here's a guy with a cowboy hat and his big boots and tall, lanky guy, and he's sitting on my car, and he says, oh, I figured this is the car you're driving because it says Hertz on it. And he says, I'm from the Methodist Church. He said, we never hear any preaching like this on prophecy. I don't know anything about your school. But he said, if you can give me the bank you do business with, I want a wire transfer of $50,000 tomorrow morning. And I got on that plane with a whole $150,000. And it was, I'll never, ever forget. That was a
You have the
miracle.
Jack Star room dedicated?
But that was just a confirmation. I'll tell you one other thing. Ken knows those were tough days because both he and I were fought by the faculty over there at the college. I'll tell you, who came into
They
that
didn't
thing.
trust us. They thought that you were coming in to really grab all the assets and then close the college.
Right.
And they thought that of me at first.
Yeah.
I
But
think
they were
we
determined
afraid
that
of
that's what
10
Ken
years
was going
later
to do.
still. It's funny.
Oh, yeah.
Including
No.
the secretary.
Sure.
Liberal
sure.
arts
She was-
attitude
she-
towards seminary
That's
training.
right.
In fact, the years between 74 and 83, we have no minutes of the board meetings. they were destroyed. And you know who did that. Anyway, when I came over there as president, my first commencement, they had a tradition of students would put something in your hand, you know, as you walked across. And it was flowers at some time. They gave you...
Gave me pennies.
Yeah, they gave him 2 cents. And then the last person would always come through and tell you what it meant. And this is what our education is worth, okay? My year was the next year. Over half of the graduates gave me a screw. And the last one came through and says, and this is what you and the Free Church can do yourself. And that was just after I had had this experience. And I was crushed, but I knew that God was behind this thing. But you know, Ken, we went into that thing. There are people, I had 2 faculty members come to me and say, is it true that we're going to have to live by certain lifestyles and you don't believe in alternative lifestyles? And I said, if you mean homosexual, lesbian relationships and alternative lifestyles. And they resigned.
Yeah.
One went to Wheaton and lasted 2 years. There was I mean, I'm saying this for the record, you can cut it out, but there was a core of homosexuality in the college in those years that was devastating, devastating.
And a core of libertarian ideas ethically spread across, together with a conviction that minor points of theology, in their view, that we had stood for at the seminary and that the college in the past had stood for, like the authority of Scripture, were questions that simply shouldn't even be asked of faculty members.
And it was just a hive of libertarian thought in regard to morals and theology. But I'll never forget the contrast with what those graduates did. And they were being used. I found out later that it was one of the professors, sociology professors, who had set them up for it, you know, and told them to do this. And so it wasn't their fault. And so, you know, that's both a good and a positive and a negative memory. But the confirmation was in raising that money the year before, so that I knew God wanted that school to exist.
You know, you could name some of those hurricanes the way the
Yeah.
meteorological department does. 'Cause you went through one after the other.
Well, you know, there's an interesting thing. I think God in his preparation had Ken take it for that period of time, then I had it, because if it had gone on 3 months more, we would have lost it.
Yeah.
3 months more.
As you look back over your years of presidency, what are the best memories? What are the things that are most fulfilling?
Besides this weekend.
Yeah.
We know it must have been.
I really enjoyed one, meeting with donors and being in the churches. I also enjoyed the give and take of faculty. The 2 faculties between the college and seminary are so different in their dynamics. It was strange at first to be involved in the college faculty. The college faculty, and I don't know how it is today, was much more family. The seminary faculty, I used to say, it was like a medical school where everyone had interest primarily in their specialty and not in the general practice.
Rugged individuals.
Yeah, and therefore it really, you weren't as much community as the college faculty have been as community. And I enjoyed them both for different reasons, and probably didn't enjoy them for other reasons. But and then I think I had just tremendous vice presidents. I really appreciate everyone that I had in my 21 years as president. I had, I think, very good deans. Seminary side, I had basically 2 deans. My last 3-4 years, Bing was here, but it was Ken and Walt. On the college side, Donna followed Baptista, who was there when I came, and they were 2 contrasting people. Both, in a sense, were housekeepers and not creative as such. But for the time over there, they were, I think needed.
There were enough creative things going on outside the internal affairs of the college. You didn't need any more.
Yeah. Well, I found just in my short experience that if you have a strong dean, that things just simply operate much more efficiently. I think Jeanette Shea's coming to the college deanship has given further a positive movement forward for our college. So, yeah. As you look back, what was what parts were the toughest for you?
I won at graduation of college. I think the as I said, the very toughest was the release of Walt, and the only decision I really regret making. In many ways, if I had to do over again, I probably wouldn't have not done it. But you said regrets?
Well, or toughest things that you remember? If there are regrets.
I think that dealing with headquarters was always tough and difficult because I think the school and the president becomes the image of the school was seen as competitive to them. I think I could not understand why the Free Church, with the jewel it has in the school, did not support it in a better way, especially from its headquarters.
Dr. Norton, you agree with that too. You felt that.
You want my sermon now or later?
Yeah.
It would use up all his time.
Okay.
But I think that was one of the greatest difficulties. I felt many times I was working with one hand tied behind me. And then for all of those years, knowing good people outside the Free Church who would have even given more, but until the last 5 years, we couldn't even get them on the board. We had what we called an advisory board that the board of directors of the Free Church wanted closed down because it was non-Free Church people. So I think whatever gains we made in spite of. And you probably had the same kind of.
Only I didn't know how to spell games.
But
May I ask the president one question? Following up the regret that you had with respect to Walt, what do you think would have been the pattern if you had managed to keep him here? What would have had as the effect upon the school?
Well, I think we probably would have lost half a dozen faculty.
That's the thing that led me to say, when I talked with Walt privately, I really think, Walt, you should resign. But I didn't have any part in the decision at all. But I advised him. And by the way, I lost my best friend. It's never been the same since. He thought he expected me to support him, to the president and personally, and I didn't. I gave him that just as advice, as one Christian father to a Christian son. But it cut deeply with him.
Walt also had problems with other cabinet members. It wasn't just faculty.
Yeah.
He could be very caustic, and and he knew how to do everybody's job better than that person did. You know, and he kind of let you know it.
Yeah.
And
he thought he did, and oftentimes he did.
yeah, but I have to say I never ever had a problem with Walt. He recognized my leadership, and again, I regret. It's my major regret. I think one of the joys, a couple of joys, is the Miami situation, especially getting the radio station.
We haven't mentioned that at all. We stepped into that. What, you eventually, first in
89.
1989?
What happened, Chatlis Foundation had been good to us in those years. And Bill Chatlis called me one day and said, we're going to stop funding this Miami Christian College. They had picked up their deficit every year. And when his uncle died and he became chairman, 2 years later they decided we're not going to do it anymore. And they would just write a check for whatever the deficit was. And he said, they need some advice. And he said, frankly, I wish you'd take them over. So I met with their board in '89, and we worked on a letter of agreement that we would manage them till '91, I think it was. And then we took it over, and through the college got accreditation for them. When we took it over, they had less than 100 students, and only a bachelor's program with, I think, 3 or 4 majors, and some property in a bad, poor location. The radio station was a WMBI type station, traditional Christian music, and I remember when we changed that in '91 to contemporary Christian music, I have never received so many letters on anything in the years. You know, we were selling out to everything, and we were
Demonic rule.
Yeah, demonic rule and pagan. Interesting thing is, the year we changed it, we had about $200,000 of listener income, and this last year we had $1,070,000 of listener income. So it didn't hurt us financially to do it, and our audience tripled over those years as a contemporary Christian station. Now, it's not necessarily the music that I would choose to listen to, but the problem was it wasn't doing, the way it was structured, it was doing nothing to help the college. And now it is reaching the age group that the college reaches, and it is by far, I think, over 90% they say of their inquiries come through the radio station. So
We now run between 400 to 500 students in all the programs.
with this year with the head count, with the seminary program and the grad program and Excel, it'll be at 500, 490, something like that.
I have another question I'd like to ask President Meyer, ex-President Meyer, because I think that you should have his story in order to deal with faculty consensus, seminary faculty consensus. And what I will do is relate the faculty consensus to you, and then your response he needs to know.
Yes.
The faculty consensus on the seminary side is that with the opening of the law school in Southern California, you sold the seminary down the river and its assets and buried them out there, and we have suffered terribly ever since.
But that wasn't, the decision wasn't made on my watch. I had met with him prior. But
I'm just relaying to you
but
what...
actually, that was a decision by the board, I think, in the transition or soon after you had come on.
May have come just a month before I
Or
came on.
something of that nature. But the interesting thing is, they said the same thing when we took over the college in Miami. And there is...
radio station helped that out.
Yeah. But
especially since that remains
but
seminary property.
The thing is, it goes back to the whole matter of the university. If we are going to be a university, then it fits. Yeah. And you know that the seminary faculty in the majority were not encouraged by becoming a university.
No, it was selling the seminary down the river in order to introduce this great, expansive dreamland of a Christian university.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is that today, and within the next 5 years, the whole university is probably going to profit from the profitability of the law school. I don't know if they know this, but we are at least a year ahead of plan
Yes, at least.
out there. And
You
So-
mean academically or financially?
financially, we had a 5-year plan, we're at least a year ahead of it.
Could I'm saying this not to be prodding, but, you know, I'm living close enough to seminary, so I know what goes on in their minds. And I think you should know, and he does know. So let
I'm
me
sure
ask,
he knows.
let me
Well,
ask.
that part I
Yeah, you may
yes.
know. The rumor in the seminary is that all these wonderful assets that we're going to come into eventually down the pike is all dreamland. Outside investigators have evaluated this and said the chances are it's going to be zero.
Are you
financially.
talking about Welty?
Yeah.
You know, that's very interesting, because the Welty money, as the president knows, came to us. We didn't go seek it. I mean, that was, I fired Bill Welty when he was a student here from the development department, and hired him back the next Monday morning. But that came to us. And that money, if and when it comes, and who knows? Hey, we don't know. When it comes, it goes totally to the seminary. And if I were a seminary faculty today, Ken, I would be praying that that money comes, because not one bit of that goes except for $1 million visit for the law school. That all comes to the seminary. I can't say that that's going to come any more than I can somebody who is, we have a gentleman on the East Coast down in Florida that we found out upped his estate from $600,000 to $1.2 million this year. I don't know that that's going to come. That man may change. In fact, he wrote Moody just about out of the will and gave that share to us, the president. Now, that man may change his mind again. But I'm willing to sit and wait for the possibility of $40 million.
Yeah. This is the story I think you have to know when they come to you privately with a tale of woe.
I know that story very well.
Yeah.
And the fact is, what is this, April 7th, for the record, 1999, we don't know what's going to happen with that. The best evaluators of an asset possible for such things have come to us and said, as close as we can tell, this is real. Now we wait to see whether it's a digital broadcasting system channels, whether they're able to be sold. And I've tried not to either promote that very loudly among the faculty, though they know very well of it, or count upon it.
Yeah, and nobody's counting on it, but look at that, I tell you, it's, I think there would be 100 other seminaries in the United States that would be willing to
Jump at it.
I mean, we haven't spent any dollars on him.
Yeah, no, in fact, what we're seeing happening now with the law school, which is, I think, what precipitates this, is that part of the money to fund that law school was to come through the Welty gift, is that it looks like if things that are happening now, with enrollments continue to happen, that law school will soon be funding itself and providing funding for the rest of the institution.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see. Once again, that's if it continues to be successful, as it has been in this past year.
And they should remember something. Seminary didn't carry its own load in the mid-60s to the mid-70s. It was subsidized.
By college tuition.
Yep.
Well, good. Ken, I don't know if you need to
No,
head out.
I've got to run.
Okay.
But thank you so much. And
Wonderful to be with you.
good
Yeah.
to
Thank
be
you
with
for rushing in from Florida last night and now
yeah.
back to Florida today.
Right.
And I'll let you know whether I can get down there on the
21st.
21st.
Okay. Well, good. Thanks so much.
No, we appreciate
We'll
renewed.
say
you'll
hello,
have to stay
Colleen,
with
and you
us
to
a
Ruth.
No, I will.
Yeah.
Right. Breadth or depth?
Well, this man knows more of the history
Yeah.
than anybody.
Yeah. So I want to get, those are two things that I want to probe before we're finished. And, okay. Dr. Norton, I want to get back to the time when TEDS was started, because it was soon after the inauguration of the Divinity School that you left. Now, I know that those were painful times. Are those times you could talk about? Are you open to talking about some of the things that may have happened during those days?
I'm not indisposed at all, because in the providence of God, and I think we need to bring theology into this. All of this has been under the sovereign control of God. Now, most of our emphasis has been on the interpersonal jousting and sparring and carrying on the way we humans are prone to do. And every once in a while, there's a shaft of light from the sun which shines through the clouds, which reminds us that there is still light, the sun is still shining, the Creator put it there. And one of the great things in all of this is for us to understand, whether it's fully appreciated or not, is that God's been in charge here, in spite of all that we've done. And we just keep repeating and duplicating what the children of Israel did from year one. We get squared away with the Lord, and then we come right down and start cavorting again. And one of the things I hope is this becomes the numero uno of Wesleyan theology and pastoral preparation, that we don't lose sight of God's control and His greatness and all His sovereignty in it. And the thing that I tell the students in the Reformed Seminary is, my God is so sovereign that He can use a Whitefield and a John Wesley at the same time.
Right. But not necessarily the geographical and ecclesiological descendants of Wesley.
Yeah.
See,
That's
having
right.
this #1 Wesleyan seminary is a vastly different thing from having it to be a #1 United Methodist seminary.
That's right. And I just bring this in to focus on God's control. And this is one of the basic things in all of this, and our pain has been promised us. In the world, you're going to have pain, tribulation, and misunderstanding, and not only that, outright Christian hatred. if such a thing can be Christian.
At least hatred.
Huh?
At least hatred.
Well, but I'm saying we're all believers and Christians in this thing, and it's just awesome to see how we duplicate not only the Reformation but the post-Reformation. If those fellows would have stopped fighting one another, we'd have had many more evangelical Christian churches in Europe. But we fought one another, and the Roman Catholics came in and beat the daylights out of us and took away all those evangelical churches in France.
Counter-Reformation.
Yeah. And consequently, if I can put whatever is going to be said in this context, then I have no problem, because I'm not here to say what it might have been or boo-hoo-hoo, this is what happened to me. But it happened in the providence of God, and He allowed us to go on afterwards. You see, we were moving ahead. I remember the meeting of the board when Doug Young was accepted as the new dean of the seminary. And of course, he came with his PhD from Brandeis, and his background was Canadian Presbyterianism. And it was, I can appreciate this and understand it. He was up there in Minneapolis at Northwestern schools and tied in there with the minister of the Free Church, Central Free Church at the time, who was also tied in up there. And it was refreshing. I agreed at the same time that this is a time when we had a new president and a new dean. And I can still see Arnold Olson turning on his heel or the ball of his foot, whichever, and snapping his finger. He says, boy, now we got a team. And I think it's only proper to give a positive note in this particular case. And I didn't have any personal ambitions here, but they just ran out of candidates. Who in the world would want to be president of Trinity in those days. You know, from one standpoint, there wasn't anything. For me, who had made this original petition to the general board in its midwinter meeting up there in Minneapolis, I felt that the Free Church needed this kind of seminary. And when I was studying at Northern Baptist and discovered in my dissertation research what God had been doing and got in with Gunnar Westin, who was the first non-confessional chair of history at the University of Uppsala. Up to that time, you had to be a Lutheran to be chairman of church history. But here this Baptist was, and he was asked in the same year to be the head of the Baptist seminary in Stockholm. And he turned that down to head this up. And he has written this volume. It was in Swedish, of course, and one of the Bethel men translated it into English, The Free Church Movement Throughout the Ages. And that was just one of the books. I went over to Stockholm and saw his other books in the Baptist Seminary Library there. And in the providence of God, he led me not to go into linguistics, but to get into the mentorship, under the mentorship of Peter Stiansen, who guided me in these things and helped me. And for that reason, I appreciated the small, struggling seedling of a seminary and a college that was developing here. Because I was been doing the same thing in Congo. They sent me out to start a Bible Institute. It took 9 years to start that thing. And the reason it did, it had no context, no frame of reference. The church wasn't ready. We didn't have the students ready for this kind of thing. And we had to get a building and all this. It took an awful long time, 9 years to get that started. And as soon as it got started, we were into it 3 months. And Colleen became ill. And the doctor ordered us home after we lost our little boy. I mean, the smallness of this, the problems of this, had already been whipped into shape. So this wasn't a problem for me, although at the time, you know, people would say, well, what's Trinity ever going to be? So with this kind of encouragement, we started out. And Doug had a background which I felt at the time was good for the seminary. And of course, people contrast some 60 students at the time I left in the seminary here with what it is today, and of course it's nothing. And yet if you don't have the seed, mustard seed, you're not going to have anything that the birds are going to come and to sit into. So,
And that 60 was a doubling.
sir?
That 60 was a doubling at that.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
you came in as president and Doug Young as dean.
That's right.
Yes.
And at the same time, one of the problems was that he had this vision of what he called at that time the Institute of Holy Land Studies. And he wanted me to be on the board. Well, I thought, Lord knows, I have enough with one fledgling institution that I should join him with the Israel-American Institute, as it was also called. And I thought, Doug, I can't do it, and I'm sure that this was probably a disappointment to him, but I couldn't see that. But what happened was, because he had this vision of what you have now over there as a university college, and it's a very important contribution to biblical studies. It wouldn't have been if he hadn't have done it. But at the same time, he put his energies in on that, which he had to. He was alone in doing it. He had a board, and the board had its headquarters here on the North Shore. But he couldn't devote himself to the development of the seminary the way he might have if he didn't have this other interest. So that was a problem. But at the same time, Arnold Wilson was very interested in the development that was going on in Israel in the 47 war and afterwards, you know, because it all tied in, and it was very free churchly in terms of eschatology. And Arnold Olson was over there and had some people going over with him and met Ben-Gurion and the mayor of Jerusalem, and we had all that input, you know, in the seminary here. And in the meantime, we had what I mentioned earlier, the development of the college. If the Belgian colonial government had not accepted or insisted, after they accepted the Protestants, that we meet this level and be certified. For them, it doesn't mean a degree, but you can't be certified as an elementary school teacher here without a degree. But that's one of the reasons we wanted to expand to a degree program. And that was one of the problems because we hadn't cleared it with the ministerial, at least some of the leadership of it. And some of these fellows were pretty rough. And I had a policy that as much as lies within me, every single free church personality who could qualify to help us out should do so. When I came in here to the presidency, we had no business manager. Now that's hard to fathom and to understand. We had a bookkeeper, young lady from Texas who kept the records, but no business manager. We had no development man. We had nobody to reach out and see and visit the people and encourage them. And I was also teaching, and that was part of it. So in the development, we asked Harold Osberg, who was studying with us, getting his degree. He and I started out as freshmen together at Crane Junior College in 1932. And he hadn't finished college yet, simply because of depression and working and this kind of thing. But he came to Trinity to finish his college work, and I said, look, he'd been in the business world, so he understood, but he didn't feel all that competent to be a business manager here, but that's how we got our first business manager. We had no development man, but there was a fella in the Free Church on the south side, the Elam Free Church, Bennett Anderson, who lives right over here.
Oh, I know him.
Riverdale,
He lives
Riverside.
right by the school.
And Bennett was an insurance man, and he could still do his insurance while doing development with us, so it wasn't such a big deal for him. And he went into that, and we went out together to try to get some of this thing going. And then we came upon the idea that we have some Free Church laymen who are retiring. There was a gentleman up in Minneapolis in the Central Free Church, and I got a hold of him, and he was very happy to go out as a layperson without any pay except his expenses. And he would visit churches in the Northwest, in Minnesota especially, in Dakotas. And then we had a fellow in the Moline Free Church, Becker. And he had been part of the Strombeck manufacturing operation, and in retirement, he said he'd be happy to go out, and he was a very experienced businessman. And he would travel into Iowa and around on behalf of the school and into Illinois and Wisconsin. And, you know, this was not great, but it was the beginning. And so we keep doing what we can do that doesn't cost us any money. And I was very grateful for the assistance and the help that these people gave.
I have a quick footnote that I
Yeah.
could apply to Doug Young. He was a very close personal friend of mine and a very, very able person. I liked him, and I think he made a good dean. But his interest in the Israel-American Institute more and more absorbed his time. In the last 2 or 3 years of his deanship before I came in, he was just about a 1/10 time for the deanship of the divinity school here, seminary here, and 9/10 of his time, or near it, went to the raising funds, making trips over there, and doing all sorts of business for that school. When I came in as dean, I think he was hurt that he was moved out, but I don't believe he ever held it against me, because we were good friends before, and I think we remained that. But his habits of supporting the Israel American Institute, he kept up, but at the same time, he wanted a full-time job as Old Testament professor here. And he kept missing more and more classes. And so finally, at the end of that first school year that I was here, well, not at the very end, but when new contract time came out, I went to him and said, Doug, this is getting to be a very, very serious problem. You're missing a third of your classes here in Old Testament. Starting next year, we're going to put you on a different pay scale. I hadn't even talked to the board about it, or the president. but I felt I could sell him on it. I said, you're going to get paid per class you actually teach. And he didn't like that at all. But he didn't have any choice. And the board said, okay, when I explained it to them.
And the president
And
supported
the
you in
president,
that?
yeah.
Well, it's one of those things where he was being supported by Trinity to do his
his work.
Israel
That's
American
what it
thing.
amounts to.
Yeah.
And his attendance immediately changed. The next year, he attended almost every class because he wanted the money. He didn't have any.
Well, he had to have the money.
He didn't have any money from Israel American Institute. That was the support for his work there. And so he managed to get to all the classes.
Now, during this time, Dr. Norton, was there some struggles or trouble brewing with the board, or?
Well,
Why did you leave? Why don't
Yeah,
you
that's,
tell us?
that's.
Well, I will tell you, I'm trying to, provide a context
Oh, yeah,
for
I won't
what's,
rush you.
no, for what's happening. And the college had a good enrollment. But at the same time, we were getting young women in at the college level in the heart of the city down there, Berto and Hermitage. And there was a girl, young woman killed in the schoolyard of the public school on Montrose and Paulina.
One of our students?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. So I got a hold of the Board of Education and wrote a letter and asked them please to put lights on the schoolyard there. And our girls would get off the bus and walk from Montrose down to Berto, and Montrose and Berto there.
It was a dangerous place.
Oh.
This is at the same time that Northern Baptist was moving or had just
Well,
moved.
they had
out of the
several
inner city.
assaults on the faculty in the inner city.
Right.
And being born and reared in Chicago, I knew what the changes were that were coming, and gangs were developing, and we would have to have male students walk the women home from the library at night, and it was getting to be an iffy thing. Well, the school, public school board did that. They put lights on, and we never had any trouble, but I had real anxieties about this. And the interesting thing is that I felt we needed to move because I saw what was happening in the intercity urban changes. And when I brought that up, there wasn't any resistance on the part of the board. But by the first, I'd been in there not quite a year when the president of the denomination came breezing into the office one day, and he started talking so fast and explained that we're going to have a Jubilee, 75th anniversary, and we're going to honor the pioneers, and we're going to do it by renovating the campus and putting up a new building, and it would tear down
in the inner city.
we tear down the old building 4211, and there's going to be a gymnasium in that, and these other buildings and all that. And he hadn't talked to me about that. And it was like all of a sudden a tornado had hit me because I had no frame of reference or comprehension about any of this. In fact, this was at the Winona Lake Conference. He already had brochures or postcards printed up on what the layout was going to be and the whole thing. and some of the board members were really fussed up. Our friend Ken mentioned one of his favorites, Franklin Olson, who was a medical doctor, and he was a pistol. If he was for it, he was for it all the way, and if he was against it, he was against it all the way. And if Arnold Olson came and presented this thing, he'd be against it.
You can count on that.
Oh, you could count on it, see? Well, we got there at Winona Lake, and I had nothing to say. I had nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
And I just let him go, run with it, you know, and all that kind of thing. And it was the beginning of change, and that was a good thing about it. Well, I prayed that we would be able to move out someplace, but when this thing developed this way, instead of being the hard-nosed president that some guys know how to be, I just got me a chair, as they say down south. I got me a chair, and I kneeled down beside it, and I said, Lord, if you want us to stay in the city, I said, please help us to develop a school here that will compete with the other inner-city schools, DePaul and Loyola. They were the big ones, you know, because I felt that God was doing something in developing, in helping to develop the merger and the whole thing the way it was. And I approached the problem that way. Well, in the meantime, we had a series of years of discussing how this thing was going to be affected. And we called in an architect, and he was an old line Free Church guy who belonged to the Moody Church. And he was very pro and helpful and all that kind of thing, but they started boring. Carl Johnson. They started boring for, you know, to know what's underground.
For a foundation.
And lo and behold, they got down 9 feet and came to water. Well, years and years ago, Lake Michigan was much farther up and all that, but you go down 9 feet and come to water.
Below Lake Michigan's level, see?
Yeah.
And this was all a great swamp. The whole city of Chicago was a swamp 150 years ago.
So,
150,
you know, when the architect's report came in, this being ATO's idea, and I have to report that they drilled down 9 feet, they got water. They said, we can't put up a gymnasium and go down deep enough to play basketball, because that was our big thing, basketball, not football, basketball. Well, it looked like I was trying to scotch the whole thing, you know, and that didn't help the cause no how. So finally then, it was decided, we had a conference out in Colorado at Denver, and I remember Harvey, what's his last name? Anyhow, he was from Minneapolis, a Central Church, who was a very aggressive, dynamic businessman. He stood up and he wanted to make a speech. I had presented what the opportunities were for us if we could move out, you know. And he threw his coat down because it was hot and went up on the platform and gave a real pep speech for, let's move ahead. And so we started to move ahead and look for property. Well, we looked and looked and looked. And I was so tired of looking at these old farms. Well, Les Lovedoll was the only educator on the board, and he would come in for a meeting. And one night I drove him, he was driving, so I led him out to a site out near Mount Prospect on 22. And it was a high promontory, and you could see in distances all around. Ideal site, you know, but it wasn't ideal. One day, in all this process then, the board couldn't come up with any recommendation to the annual meeting on a new property. So the annual meeting, the conference, determined that there would be a group of trustees, 3 guys, Kelly High, Hornis of Muskegon, Michigan, and Gunderson of Wheaton, that these fellows would be the trustees, because they're the ones for the whole Free Church who had the control. That they would
manufactured office furniture.
Yeah.
What's his name? Was a medical doctor.
No, Kelly High.
No, Kelly High was a farmer.
A rice farmer. And Gunderson was a real estate development man.
Building.
building.
Builder.
He built a lot out at Wheaton and on the North Shore.
Yeah.
So these guys were qualified. Well, Kelly High, let me get this first. I was getting ready to leave that afternoon, about this time, for Greeley, Colorado. And in those days, we traveled by train. I had my suitcase under a little table in front of my desk over there, and the phone rang. And this fella, who had been in Sunday school with me at the First Free Church, but had married into a Lutheran family and was no longer in the Free Church, but his father was a member of the First Free Church in Somerdale. John Carlson, Ephraim Carlson had two sons who were in real estate and building with him. And this fellow was in the real estate end of things. And he says, Will, I hear that Trinity's looking for property. And I said, yes. And I had visions of these old farm buildings leaning sideways, and he was so enthusiastic. And he said, well, he said, I just got this multiple listing in, and I want to make an appointment and you come out and see it. I said, well, boy, I don't mind seeing it. I said, but I got my train. I have to go to Greeley, Colorado, and I have to get downtown to take it. And I got my bag right here, so when I come back, I'll call you. Well, that was a really dangerous thing if it was as attractive as he said it was. So I went out there, and we had our meetings for a whole week and came back and called him up. And then I called Gunderson, because he was nearby, if he would be interested in seeing this. And of course, he's a very affable Norwegian. He was Norwegian all the way. And he said he'd be happy to meet me, so he got in his Cadillac, and I met him up there at Glenview. Glenview is where the real estate office was. And the real estate lady, Baird and Warner, was there. And I drove with Gunderson as she led us out to where this place was. And I couldn't believe we went on 22 there, and we turned off in the old road, which is no longer functioning. And we wound in on the trees. This is October.
The path is still there, but we never use it.
Yeah, okay.
Show me where that is.
And we turned the corner. Here was this magnificent orange maple. I mean, it was so glorious. And you know, I'm so emotional because this is not Free Church stuff. This is over and beyond our abilities.
Too good for the Free Church, naturally.
I had been calling Harold Helene. I'd gotten clues and sites on different properties. And I said, Harold, what do you think of this? And he'd have somebody, because he was in Bell Savings at the time. And they were,
Bell Savings.
yeah, you were all inquiring about, mortgages. So he had his ear open and eyes open to whatever's good, bad, or indifferent, and how much it would cost. And so I knew this wasn't for the Free Church. And then we swung into this vista. And here was this beautiful American colonial mansion. And I thought, oh, Lord. This is just the opposite of all those old farmhouses that we'd seen.
Among other things, the owner had spent thousands of dollars, many thousands of dollars, planting esoteric trees and shrubs all around through the 90 acres, so that it would be just a
one of the leading landscape architects, Jens Jensen, a Dane, who had done some of the park system in Chicago, was the one who was hired to plant trees and flowers that were indigenous to the state of Illinois. So all of these trees here had real meaning. I mean, they were here because they were planted. And the pond, the whole bit. We got inside, and they had this Dutch tile on the fireplace. Well, it was very delightful and beautiful and all that. But I covenanted with the Lord. I said, now, Lord, if there's anything in this for us, you help Gunderson to answer affirmatively when I ask him. We got outside, the lady went, And I asked him, I said, Brother Gunderson, what do you think? Should the other members of the committee see this? And you know, he jumped to a stop and looked at me as though I were crazy. And he said, by all means. So we got a hold of Hornis, who is also one of the old Norwegians. And he came over and he saw the thing.
He couldn't really talk English plainly. He was truly Norwegian.
So Kelly High was out in California checking the rice, and he couldn't come before a conference. Conference came, this report was given, the price was given. In the meantime, I knew we didn't have a business manager, we had to have one. We didn't have a development man, we had to have one. We didn't have an attorney, and I didn't know when we would need one. And I consulted with Titus Johnson, who had been the pioneer missionary in the Belgian Congo, with whom I had consulted many times. Now, he went out as a Bible Institute graduate from Moody, was with AIM. His fiancée died, and he felt God had a purpose in that he'd be freed up to pioneer. And so he pioneered and founded the Free Church mission out there and discovered the physical needs of these people, came home and took his medical studies, finished Wheaton College and then med school, but he never got back because he had all these debts. And the Free Church couldn't help him in the Depression to pay off his medical debts. But I consulted with him about who in the world I should get as an attorney for the college and the seminary. And he said, well, I don't know, but I'll talk to my attorney. And that's how we got Brandel to be the attorney. Finally, after a couple of weeks, he called me and he came to see me, and he met me after 5 o'clock one day. And he said, well, if you guys don't push me, I'll be glad to work with you on any of your needs and projects.
He was a Christian of sorts.
Oh, he was a member of the Covenant Church, and he was great on developing their retirement homes.
Oh, those are models.
Yeah, he had some different perspectives and all that, but he was solid in his covenant background. So, what should happen then when it comes opportunity for this real estate deal? I think the original amount was $250,000 for this acreage on the freeway where you have a clover leaf like this. And he was great on tax law. And Brandel told Mr. Welch, who was head of the Welch Scientific Company, making litmus papers and other instruments and for science for schools.
Nothing to do with Walsh grapefruit.
Right.
And he said to him, you know, you're going to have to pay $104,000 to IRS.
Increased value of the property.
For the capital gains. But he says, you can help this little school by giving them, over a 3-year period, 3-year tax period, $104,000. And the guy agreed to it. And in December of one year, he gave the first deposit. January this next year, he gave the next deposit. And a year from then, he gave the final deposit. And for all of this, then, we had it less than less the amount of $104,000.
And it cost him hardly anything, really,
That's right.
because of the tax rebate.
Yeah.
So what we got here was for peanuts. And to see, you know, this, you asked here about what are some of the great answers to prayer. We prayed for property. We looked at other property in Highland Park and around a horse farm and things like that. It just didn't ring. It didn't ring true. But there was no argument against this property here. So that's how we got the property, but in the meantime, how are you going to develop it? And it was determined that we ought to have a fundraising program. We never had one before in the whole Free Church history.
At least you never raised funds.
Yeah. And so it was decided, now who should make the recommendation? Because we were consulting with these three committeemen who were trustees. Incidentally, Kelly High went to the conference in Minneapolis and drove down here to look at the property because it was understood that Kelly would have to give clearance to it. And he called me from the airport and he said, Will, I can feel a college on that property. Now, those were his very words.
Yeah.
So we were greatly encouraged by that, but then the question came, now how are you going to get the money for it and develop it? So it was decided to have a Trinity advancement campaign. And you got to have somebody to head that up because we were not in a position. I was still teaching, and our development man was just starting in. He's not gifted along this kind of a real hard-nosed fundraising campaign. So Gunderson would go to Florida every winter, and he met a fellow down there whose name was Lindblad. Lindblad's family came from Racine, Wisconsin. He was a Moody graduate, was a singer himself, a very unique guy, but he was into fundraising. And it was Gunderson who recommended him to be a professional fundraiser. So he met with us, the committee of the board, met with the board, explained to them how the thing would go, and the board got his understanding of what the salary would be for doing it. So it's not on a percentage basis, but it's on a salary basis. And his salary for this was to be $20,000. Which, in the eyes of some people, was very humongous, especially since the president of the institution was earning all of $6,000 a year.
Top salary in the whole school.
So, there it was. Now, the intriguing thing on all this, a gentleman had come in a couple of years before, in '58, and presented all these plans for the pioneers to honor them at the 75th anniversary. And now, we got this fundraiser. So, we're having a meeting of the executive board of the Free Church up in Minneapolis, and I was invited to explain to them what this thing was, the Trinity Advancement Campaign. And when I did that, the president of the Free Church said, now why don't you tell him what his salary is? Well, you know, that was, show me your jugular vein, see? And it was disgusting to me because that's really beside the point. The Free Church is not involved in that. They'd authorized this thing. So I told them $20,000. But ever since then, you know, there was no real support for this thing from those who could. But we went in and we started in and made the plans and made the contacts and the preliminary thing. You know, that fundraising thing takes a lot of planning and all that. You just don't go out and pass a collection plate because it was a proper fundraising effort. And there were spots of success. Now, I don't know whatever happened to it after I left because it hadn't, you know, I left in the middle of that thing. And I had approached one gentleman in one of our big churches who was chairman of it, co-chairman of it, to give a lead gift so that the rest of it came after with that. And that was for $150,000. And, you know, it was as though I had asked for the complete area on the other side of the moon. Now, there was no negative comments made and all that. But things went from bad to worse in this process and in this effort. And we came from one meeting in Chicago, and I drove the chairman of the board home on my way to my home because he lived in Arlington Heights at the time. And as we were driving out the freeway, he just laughed. He said, do you think you're going to raise this money? Now, when you got the board chairman talking like that. I mean, it's death.
It really is. No ownership is what they say.
Yeah, it's death. And then we had a meeting in my house of the executive committee of the board one night. And it went on to 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was a rough meeting. And I felt embarrassed that there was so much racket, noise for my family.
You live quite a little ways from your neighbors, though.
Well, it's not the neighbors, it's my own family. I never shared any of this stuff with my family because I figure when I go home, I want to be free of it. And Colleen says, what in the world kind of thing is this? And that was the beginning of the end because
Your son knew about it because he was terribly hurt.
yeah.
He really was. This is Will Jr.
Yes.
Now,
So what happened was then, one day, the executive committee of the denomination, the president came in February 12th, Lincoln's birthday. He was down Spoken Chapel over in the mansion. We use that end of the chapel there, end of the building on the first floor for chapel. And he was reporting.
Rockford room.
The Rockford Room is chapel.
His
Yeah,
chapel.
okay.
Oh, his classroom, chapel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for big classes.
Yeah.
And he was reporting in chapel on his book, Believers Only, that it would be, he assured the students it would be ready for the conference. And he told them what pains he had gone to do research on it and to get the data from the Library of Congress and all around. And then he said there's some stuff in there he says I'm sure that Professor Norton wouldn't agree with. Well, after chapel then he disappeared. He was gone someplace. And the next day I was in my office and I got a phone call from the chairman of the board, and he said, Will, Andy Johnson, who was moderator of the conference, is coming down, and we're going to meet in Harold Helene's office about 3 o'clock this afternoon, and we'd like for you to be there.
Sal National Bank.
Well, he is Bell Savings.
Oh, Bell City,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Thanks.
That's
Right.
where he had his headquarters, president. And I got down there in time, and Harold was there, and Andy Johnson, and the chairman of the board. And the chairman of the board was writing on a legal-sized paper there, and he was sweating it out. And I had already called Colleen, and I, just on a whim, I said, honey, they're calling a meeting down at Harold's office, and I think they're going to give me the air. I told her categorically. And I really, it was an uncanny kind of peace that I had about the whole thing. I was anticipating it. You see, the month before in January, they had a meeting of the general board up at Minneapolis. And what they were trying to do there, I really don't know. But all of a sudden, impromptu, and I mean not spontaneous, but impromptu, I was called upon to give a report on the state of the seminary. Nobody had asked me to prepare anything. Well, the development, as I have indicated up to this point, was such that at this time, I was really hurting in my soul. And the only thing I could think of was Abraham. Abraham didn't know where this thing was going, but God told him to get up and move out and trust me. And I was so really broken up that my friends in leadership of the Free Church apparently didn't know how to trust God. If it's His work, all my life, my missionary life, this is it. We had $625 a year, each one of us, my wife and I, for our allowance for 1 year of missionary work, $1,250. And I have to learn to trust God to make that work or to provide whatever else I needed. And I thought, if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for anybody else to trust God. And here these guys are raising Hob and raising Cain, and are not getting behind this effort, and the money isn't coming in. Well, I am not dogmatic what the exact amount was, but all these funds that we've been talking about here, I mean, what my problem was in those days was peanuts compared to the millions that these people have been talking about here today. So I got up and tried to give a report. And if there's ever a time in the world that I really flubbed the dub, it was then. I just broke down and cried.
By the way, I had nothing to do with his resignation. At the time, I don't think he knew that or believed it, maybe.
Oh no, you weren't in my purview at all.
Good. I was in your son's purview.
Well,
He didn't forgive me for almost a year,
is that right?
but we met after that.
He's never told me that.
Is that right? Well, we had a good conversation afterward, and I laid out the things where I had been involved and where I had not been involved.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, that satisfies me.
Yeah.
And so
No.
I disclaimed complete
No,
responsibility.
You see, I called on Ken because I had this premonition. And if we're going to save Trinity, we have to have a quality person with degree, with understanding, and with vision. And I thought, if I go down with the ship, if I go down, it's not going to go down with the ship. They're going to have a fella here who knows, and it'll be a fresh voice, and they'll hear him. Now,
That was a year after I'd come, though.
yeah, he came in '63, and I knew that the rope was running out, and I had to get somebody, or the whole thing would go. And I was very convinced that this is what God had been doing, and I also know from my Congo experience that whenever you go forward and make progress, you're going to be slammed on both sides, if not from the top too. And so I was anticipating it and expecting God to do something. Now, my background at Wheaton College was J. Oliver Buswell, observing him and the problems in the Presbyterian Church. And these dear people, Princeton split off under Machen, and Westminster was founded. Well, Buswell was in on that. Then Westminster split and Faith was founded, and Buswell was in on that. And then Faith split and Covenant was founded. And now, more recently, Faith split again to Hatfield, Pennsylvania, and one of my classmates became the president of that institution for a while. So finally, even McRae, the Old Testament professor, left Faith.
At the age of 85.
Yeah, and I thought, look, forget it. I am not going to be part of a big split. But and therefore, when the news came at that meeting in Helene's office that day, I was determined already that I'm not going to fight anything. What's happened up to this point, I'm going to make it so that Trinity can grow and develop whatever, because God is sovereign. So we got in the meeting. We had to wait outside for a while because Harold had a client or a person in there. We moved in, and the chairman of the board took over, and these are his first words. Will, the board has decided that Trinity needs stronger leadership. I mean, I remembered those words, so that's a quote. That's not my interpretation. So I cut in right then and there, and I said, well, when do you want that to begin? Today or at the end of the academic year? Well, you know, he wasn't expecting that. Now, he was my pastor. So we had another problem in that. I had no pastor to go to pray about a situation. And I wasn't going to drag this thing out. And he was expecting me to collapse and to weep all over the place and all that. And I had absolute perfect peace about this. So I just categorically said, okay, now when do you want this to occur? I didn't want to hear any more. I got the nub of it right here. And it was a hesitation. Well, the end of the semester would be fine. So then we had the commencement, the conference down in New Jersey. And several of us, Ed Netland, who was the dean, I and David Anderson drove down with the secretary of, my secretary also drove with us down there. And I didn't have any problem. I had a phone call from the pastor of the Wheaton Free Church, and he advised me not to make an issue of this because you'd breach, that's the term he used, the free church. Well, I wasn't interested in that. I seen what happened in the Presbyterian church. They just kept dividing, and the Lord's work needs unity. And some of us have to get shot down, but you don't have to break the place up because of that. So we got down to the conference, and at the conference, when it came up, it was about 4:45 in the afternoon of the first meeting. And one of the supporters of the seminary, of Trinity at the time, stood up and said, "I want to know what this thing means, and well, you know, what's the deal here?" Well, fortunately, it was so late in the afternoon that Andy Johnson was able to beat the gavel, and he said he declared adjournment until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, whenever they met. And he saved the day, and ATO went over to this fella, who was also the father of Will's roommate at Wheaton. And he said, "What's wrong with you? Don't you know he's been fired?" So that's where it was. And the next morning it came up, and they had a vote on it. I didn't say a word, didn't ask for, nobody asked for an explanation. It was the funniest thing in the world. And it's not the vote that bothered me, but it was the summer that Palendo came. You remember Palendo?
I certainly do.
Big, tall African.
6'4" African chief.
And he was the chief evangelist for the mission out there in Ubangi.
He had participated in the resurrection from the dead of a person who had been killed.
Really?
And this made his reputation.
And he and I knew each other like this. You know, the most terrible thing was, here I am. I was the legal representative out there. I was the head of this Bible school out there. I'd been out there for 2 terms, 5 years the first time, 2.5 the second time, because we were out there all during the war. Yeah. Nobody arranged for us to be bonded in any way. And even when he was in our home church, you know, we were strangers. Simply because those who were in authority, I no longer had the ability or the relationship with these guys anymore. I was out. And that was the thing that really bothered me. We went down to Moline with Will and the family to hear Plendo because they knew him. But that was it, see? And we were in on no meeting, no social life or anything that included him. It is a very strange thing.
May I make a comment there? Will acted like a Christian at that time. I have to hand it to you. I didn't have any part in his resignation. Didn't want to have any part.
I didn't resign.
Well,
they wanted me to resign.
The request for you to resign.
And I said
fire
no.
you, if you want to put it bluntly.
Yeah. You see, I wanted it on the record, and I appreciate this, and I want you to know, too, on the record, that I never related you to this in any way.
I didn't know that, to be honest. But I knew that your son did, so I assumed maybe that you did, but were just kind enough not to reveal it to me.
No, I had never. I mean, I've never lived that way. I know who my friends were and who the foes were. And the awesome thing was to see how this thing developed. Now, there is a certain managerial methodology or manner that is very strange, and it relates to this, that there's all kinds of action behind the scenes. Then there's appearance in chapel, and a statement is made, but nothing here to me. Never at any time did the president of the denomination come into my office on all his visits to Chicago. Never did he phone me, but he would go to see the treasurer of the board. He would go upstairs to the business office and talk to the business manager, even when I was on the campus, and would never come and talk to me.
Will says that he took this very calmly, but I think we ought to recognize what to most of us was obvious. He was deeply hurt.
Oh, there's no
Deeply hurt.
question about that, but I was determined that this is not going to affect my family, but they couldn't help but feel hurt, because
And
the
they
chairman
were
of the
hurt.
board was our minister.
Yeah.
And we had nobody. I mean, there were two fellows in the church who came and prayed with us. One was a board member, Einar Erickson. Another one was this Anderson fellow who was a deacon at the church. But other than that, there wasn't one soul. And I had really tried. And not only that, but at the conference, nobody talked to me. I was supposed to, I was called in with the chairman of the board so that he could give a report as to what the seminary situation was, the executive board of the Free Church.
I didn't offer to pray for him and with him. I look upon that as a serious mistake on my part,
Well,
an unchristian response on my part.
well, I
But I
hadn't even
didn't.
thought of you in praying that way,
No,
because
well, I
I felt
should've.
that the board
I
ought to
should've.
do something.
I should
But
have.
here at the conference, before the meeting on Wednesday morning when the business started, on Tuesday afternoon late, I was brought in, and it was presented that I was no longer the president. I was terminating. What term they used, I don't know. And I was asked to sit outside while they discussed it. Well, I sat there until sunset. Nobody called me back in. I went back in there, they were all gone. And nobody talked to me in any way. There I'm wandering around like a zombie by myself. My wife wasn't with me. I went with these other Trinity people. And it's one of the most bizarre experiences to remember. And I figured, well, here we are now. It's Friday. There were some ladies who needed a driver to drive them back to the Midwest. And they were interested in, my driving them. They'd been people my wife was very well acquainted with. So on Saturday morning, I went in and wrote a note I couldn't find anybody in the conference office. I wrote a note and saying I have a ride back to Palatine, and I just want you to know, because I'd been asked to lead in prayer on Sunday morning. That's all I'd been asked to do. And that's okay, I don't mind, and I don't mind praying, but they can get anybody to lead in prayer. And I got by the grapevine that that really turned the tables and pulled the shades and pulled out the floor and the rug and the whole bit. It's wonderful that the walls had held up. But it showed great irresponsibility. The chairman or the president of the denomination never said a word about this, or what I should do, or counseled me, or thanked me, or anything. And I thought, well, what am I staying around here for? When nobody wants to talk to you, it's sort of unclean. And so I thought it's better to ride home with these ladies, which I did.
Interesting now, 35 years later, the people who are here who look back at our history usually don't realize that you were fired or terminated. They look at your presence.
I never announced it. I never stated it. But when a man tells me that Trinity needs stronger leadership, and the board has decided that, well, if that's the case, he didn't ask for a resignation. And I wasn't going to resign, because I am not resigning. I was told to leave. And it has to be in the books that way.
Right. The memory of your presidency usually relates to, under your leadership, the move to this location was initiated and TEDS was begun.
Well, the seminary was here 3 years.
Yeah.
And the very summer that the college moved out was the summer you and I had a picture taken outside with one of those bulldozers. And it was a real nice memory, because we were down to rock bottom in the dirt. No, I have great peace about the whole thing, and think of the missions program. Now, what happened was, Ken wanted me to come back, and I think some of the board members did too. Wanted me to come back and teach missions, and the Lord knows I wanted to. But the way this whole thing occurred, and I had no assurance, you know, I needed a little something in my soul to get reconstituted. And to come back into this climate where nobody said yes or no or goodbye even. And then to start teaching mission. I reviewed the letter that I sent to you after your kind invite, and I went down with a half a dozen statements there as to why this would be impossible at this time. And of course, Ken was on the spot because he needed a missions prof. And I didn't want to leave him in the lurch, and I just had to say, look, I can't do it now. And that's when Herb came, I believe, and became the missions prof. And I didn't want to hurt the missions program.
That was the advantage, from my point of view, of always having a lineup of 3 or 4 whom you could call on an emergency.
He served us well.
And I'd worked with him.
Herb came.
So I figured that the Lord must have something else for me. Ken came out to the house in Palatine. We sat in the backyard under the tree out there and discussed this whole thing. And the Lord knows, over these years, I've never had an ounce of recrimination or hostility towards Ken. Never. But I just had to, just like Ken Meyer had to do with Kate, just tell him that, you know, it was a very hard thing for me to say, no, I can't do it. But I didn't feel at liberty to agree. Maybe that's a better way.
From my part, I was very desperate, really, because I saw the money wasn't coming in, and there were all sorts of strains there that made it extremely difficult for you ever to pull things together and get the money in when you had the opposition that we have been speaking about. And so, in my case, partly because I trusted Harry Evans. He was thoroughly committed as a free church, as an evangelical, and committed to the seminary. And so I thought, well, maybe under his leadership, it will go. Let's trust in God's providence that this will be so. So while I never did the least bit of sort of shoving Will out, I must say I welcomed and cooperated thoroughly with Harry Evans.
I mean,
it was the only way to
chairman
make
of
it
the
live.
board,
It was the only way to make it live.
That's right. And I have no, negative feelings about that. That's essentially, that gave me peace about your being there. And the other side of it is, I hated to think that you were going to have to go through all this, but nevertheless, it's better to have somebody in there than nothing.
That's right. And as you started this whole discussion with the sovereign God, look at what he's done.
Well, I've never yet had a sabbatical of any kind. And I've been in the free church work. I'm still a free church minister. This conference, it's 60 years since they accepted me for missionary service. And it'll be in February, 60 years since a free church ordained me. And I have yet to have any kind of sabbatical. So I thought, well, this 64 year, thank God Colleen was happy to be teaching school and help the family survive. I did get compensation for half a year, terminal wages, and I was grateful for that. But I really felt, since Wheaton College was after me to teach missions there in the grad school, I ought to visit these former students. And I started out about February 15th and went to Japan, the Philippines. I went to Japan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines, and then down into Vietnam, Southeast Asia, Singapore, and crossed over to India and Pakistan and down into Africa, where Titus Johnson was now with a Pentecostal mission on a part-time thing. And in every place I went, there were two things. Visit my former students to see how they're doing. What do I need to do to correct myself in what I'm teaching? And secondly, to visit every single educational seminary, Bible school, pastoral training school that was within the radius of my itinerary at the stop there. And I went all the way around to Europe and was visiting with Reimer, who was a missionary in Germany with the Free Church. And he was taking me out to the border for me to see the border after lunch one day. And don't you know, as the Lord in His sovereign grace would allow it, in Germany, you well know, if you come in on the right, you have the right of way. And he pointed over there and he says, there's a displaced persons camp. You know, they had them all over the place. And I turned my head after I saw it and was going to tell him something. And everything went black. I don't know what happened after that. And I came to, and I saw him trying to get out his door. And the windshield was gone. And I was dripping. And I thought, I ought to go out that door too, because whatever it was, this thing was so confused here. And I tried to do it. I passed out again. The next thing I heard, this guy behind me, through a glass window, I guess, through an open window, said, I am a doctor. Well, they got both of us in an ambulance. And I asked Reimer, I said, when I got in there, I was coherent again. I said, what happened? He said, we got hit. Totaled 2 cars. And I broke my pelvis. Huh?
Didn't total you, though.
Well, I got my head knocked once again.
You know, I wonder if I could pick up one thing that's related to this. It's a little different. Oh, do you have enough?